Mid-morning in a small suburban town. A house that looked like every other house. A family that looked like every other family. Inside these walls lived a young mother whose world revolved around two little girls and a future she was working hard to build. Then came a day in late September, a day that began like any other, until it didn't. By the time help arrived, there was nothing anyone could do. A healthy heartbeat had gone silent. A life full of plants, suddenly gone. No struggle. No warning. No explanation. And for a while, that was the end of the story. Their mother's laughter. Her routines. Her footsteps in the hallway. In an instant, all of it became memory. Friends mourned. Family struggled to understand. The community whispered but accepted the loss. And yet, somewhere in the middle of the grief, something about Stacy's final moments refused to settle. There was no obvious reason to question anything. No clear sign that her story was unfinished. But a detail, small, ordinary, easily overlooked, sat quietly in a place most people never see. Not a confession. Not a witness. Not a clue left at the scene. Just something that survived when nothing else did. And if not for that single overlooked fragment, one that waited patiently for months, the truth behind Stacy's final day would have stayed hidden forever. What it revealed, and where it eventually led investigators, shocked even the people who believed they had seen everything. Before her name became part of a legal file, before investigators retraced the last hours of her life, Stacy was simply a girl growing up in the heart of North Carolina. She came from a community where doors were often left unlocked, where neighbors waved from across their yards, where families still gathered on Sundays just to sit, eat, and talk. From the time she was young, Stacy had a gentleness about her. Soft-spoken, quick to comfort. Someone who cared instinctively, without needing to be asked. She loved children even before she ever became a mother. Friends from her school years remembered her as the one who volunteered, the one who tutored younger students, the one who always seemed to carry a calmness that made others feel safe. As she grew older, that natural tenderness shaped her dreams. She studied early childhood development. She wanted to work with kids, to help them grow, learn, feel seen. It wasn't just a career path for her. It was who she was. Stacy adored the idea of building a family of her own. A home filled with warmth, stability, and laughter. A life rooted in the quiet joy of motherhood. Stacy's parents were the kind of people who shaped her values without ever needing to speak them aloud. Her mother was nurturing in a way that seemed almost instinctive, the person everyone in the family called when life felt overwhelming. Her intuition was quiet but sharp, the kind that could sense when one of her children needed her, even if they hadn't said a word. Her father carried a different kind of strength. Not loud, not forceful, but steady, dependable. The kind of presence that made people feel protected simply by being in the room. Together, they created a home filled with weekend dinners, holiday traditions, and an unspoken belief that family was something you built slowly, with intention. In the months leading up to Stacy's death, her parents noticed something. A shift. A heaviness in her eyes that she tried to hide with a smile. They asked if she was okay. They offered help. But like many people who carry quiet burdens, Stacy always insisted she was fine. Outside the family, Stacy's closest circle came from two places: her preschool coworkers and her church community. Her coworkers described her as the teammate who never lost patience, even on long days filled with crying children, spilled paint, and the endless energy of toddlers. They noticed she began arriving a little earlier, staying a little later, working harder to keep her focus. Her church friends saw it too. During gatherings she laughed, but the laughter didn't linger the way it used to. A few close confidants tried to check in with her, the gentle, quiet kind of concern that isn't pushy, but comes from people who care. Something in Stacy's life was shifting. Something subtle. Something she wasn't ready to talk about. And no one knew how urgently those moments would matter. Looking back, everyone would remember the little signs. The exhaustion she brushed off. The moments of distraction. The hints of worry behind her smile. At the time, none of it seemed alarming. Life gets busy. Mothers get tired. Everyone assumed it was just another season she was pushing through. No one realized the quiet battle Stacy was carrying, or how it would shape the final days of her life. And no one, not her parents, not her friends, not even Stacy herself, could have imagined how the smallest decision, made long before her last day, would later become the key to understanding everything that followed. Long before her final day, Stacy's story intertwined with someone who seemed to share her hopes for the future. His name was Joshua. They met in a way that felt almost ordinary, the kind of everyday encounter that later becomes a turning point. Joshua worked as a paramedic, confident, quick-thinking, trained for moments where seconds mattered. To Stacy's friends he was charming, outgoing, the kind of person who could lighten a room without asking for attention. Their early days together had an easy warmth, playful conversations, late-night talks, a sense of compatibility that made people around them say, they just fit. At the time, there was no reason to question anything. They looked perfect together. They acted perfect together. And to the outside world, they were building the beginning of a beautiful life. Joshua grew up in a stable middle-class household. His parents encouraged discipline, hard work, and achievement. He played sports, excelled in school, and set his sights early on a career in emergency medicine. Those who knew him described him as determined, someone who didn't do anything halfway, someone who approached every challenge with intensity. His parents were proud of him. A son with a respected job. A future built on service and skill. But like anyone, Joshua carried traits that showed more clearly to those closest to him. He was highly intelligent, analytical, and tactical in how he approached problems. A mindset that made him effective in emergencies. At the same time, friends noticed he liked routine, order, predictability. They described him as someone who liked things a certain way. Not a flaw, just a pattern. One that would matter later. Their relationship moved at a natural pace. Dating, engagement, and eventually marriage. Their wedding was simple, intentional, and filled with hope. Soon after came their daughters, the center of Stacy's world. To anyone watching from the outside, they were the picture-perfect young family. Smiling photos, holiday gatherings, a future that seemed firmly in place. But behind closed doors, the reality was more complicated. A friend later remembered Stacy confiding about arguments. Nothing extreme, just the strain of young parenthood. There were financial pressures, long work shifts, moments of disconnect that gradually grew. Not enough to alarm anyone, just enough to cast a faint shadow over what seemed like a flawless life. As the months passed, something in Stacy began to change. Physically, she felt off. Episodes of dizziness, nausea, fatigue she couldn't explain. Joshua suggested stress, the weight of motherhood, work, and everyday responsibilities. Her parents, however, noticed she looked pale, drained, not quite herself. Stacy became worried enough to schedule doctor appointments, checkups, blood work, exams. But everything came back normal. No red flags, no diagnosis, no explanation for why she was feeling worse instead of better. It was a mystery no one yet understood, and one that quietly tightened its grip as the weeks went on. The day before everything changed unfolded like any other. Stacy spent time with her daughters. Routine activities, small moments, everyday tasks. Joshua followed his own schedule. There were no arguments, no strange events, nothing that signaled the next day would alter their world forever. It was ordinary, almost too ordinary. The kind of calm that feels forgettable, until it becomes the prologue to something unthinkable. The morning began quietly. Stacy went about her normal routine, helping her daughters, tidying the house, preparing for the day. She texted her mother, reached out to a friend. Nothing alarming, nothing unusual. At some point later that day, Joshua said he found her unresponsive. Emergency responders were called. They worked quickly, professionally, methodically. But by the time she reached medical care, Stacy was gone. Doctors provided the most logical explanation: a sudden cardiac event in a young woman with no warning signs. Her family was devastated. Her community shocked. Her daughters left without their mother. For everyone involved, it felt like a tragic, unforeseeable loss. Grief settled over Stacy's family like a heavy fog. Friends gathered, meals were delivered, prayers whispered. But in the middle of that grief, a few things happened quickly. Joshua moved forward with cremation. Insurance processes began, ordinary steps in situations like this, yet difficult for a grieving family to watch unfold. Her parents couldn't shake a feeling they didn't want to speak aloud. A sense that something was off. Friends exchanged glances, unspoken concerns lingering in the air. But what could they say? What evidence did they have? Nothing but instinct. Nothing but a quiet wrongness they couldn't explain. At this point, Stacy's case was closed. Filed away. Accepted as a heartbreaking medical tragedy. No one, not her family, not her friends, not even the doctors, had any reason to doubt it. But there was one detail no one had calculated. One decision Stacy made long before her final day, a decision rooted in kindness, generosity, and the desire to help others. Stacy was an organ donor. And that single fact, that single preserved piece of her, was about to unravel everything. In the weeks after Stacy's passing, her parents tried to settle into the reality of life without their daughter. They tried to concentrate on the grandchildren, on honoring Stacy's memory, on simply getting through each day. But grief has a way of sharpening instinct. And the deeper they sat with their loss, the stronger one feeling became. Something wasn't right. Not with Stacy's final days. Not with the symptoms she described. Not with how quickly everything ended. Eventually, they reached a point where staying silent was no longer an option. They contacted authorities, not demanding answers, not accusing anyone, but asking for clarity. Detectives listened patiently. Cases like this rarely reopen. The odds of new evidence after a cremation are low. Very low. But the parents' consistency, their sincerity, their unwavering belief that something had been overlooked, made investigators pause. Just long enough to decide, let's take one more look. Under typical circumstances, the case would have ended there, with sympathy, paperwork, and closure. But Stacy had made a choice far earlier in her life, one rooted in compassion. She was an organ donor. What most people never realize is that organ donation requires meticulous medical protocols. And among those protocols are preserved biological samples. Samples stored securely, cataloged carefully, and kept long after the rest of the case has faded. When detectives learned this, they made a single phone call, one that led them to a refrigerated laboratory miles away. Inside that facility sat a collection of sealed vials, one of them belonging to Stacy. The existence of that sample was unusual, unexpected, and it meant one thing. For the first time since her passing, investigators had something they could test. When toxicologists examined the preserved blood, they expected to find nothing remarkable. Nothing that contradicted the original medical assumption. But within days, they noticed something unusual. Chemical indicators appeared in the results. Markers that didn't align with a natural, sudden cardiac event. The lab retested the sample. Then tested it again. And again. Each time, the same pattern emerged. A compound not typically found in the human body at such levels. A substance commonly known by the public as an ingredient found in certain over-the-counter products. Tetrahydrozoline. The discovery wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was subtle, quiet, a line on a report that didn't belong there. Yet that single line changed everything. Once the toxicology findings landed on their desk, investigators knew one thing. They needed to look deeper. They returned to the family, re-interviewed friends, reviewed every report from the day Stacy collapsed, and they spoke again with Joshua. His recounting of events remained consistent, structured, detailed, confident. But some parts didn't align perfectly with certain timelines. Not enough to draw conclusions, but enough to raise eyebrows. Meanwhile, financial documents came under routine examination. Life insurance, claims, policies. Not accusations, simply the standard questions investigators ask when a case shifts from medical to forensic. Slowly, a picture began to take form. Not a complete one, but enough pieces to suggest this was no longer a closed chapter. Investigators expanded their lens. They studied Joshua's activities in the days, weeks, and months following Stacy's passing. They noted every documented step, the insurance process, his online patterns, his social interactions, his purchases, his travel routines. All presented factually. All part of the standard forensic procedure when attempting to understand a person's state of mind. No detail alone was definitive. But collectively, they painted a timeline investigators needed to examine carefully. In December of 2019, after months of analysis, interviews, and consultation with toxicology experts, law enforcement made their move. Joshua was arrested on suspicion relating to Stacy's death. The community reacted with shock. Friends felt torn between disbelief and concern. The daughters were placed under protective arrangements as authorities ensured their safety during the legal process. For many, this moment marked the first time they realized Stacy's case was not what they had assumed. Years later, the case widened. New allegations surfaced, each requiring careful, factual, and methodical examination. Authorities investigated claims involving the children's well-being. They examined reports of possible attempts to influence potential witnesses. They reviewed an alleged staged incident involving a claimed kidnapping attempt. Each allegation added new layers to an already complex investigation. Authorities saw patterns worth analyzing. Defense attorneys firmly denied the claims, arguing that the picture painted by investigators was incomplete and misinterpreted. With each new development, the case grew more tangled, a web of legal motions, hearings, and competing narratives. With so many pieces on the table, so many reports, interviews, allegations, and unanswered questions, prosecutors began preparing for a courtroom battle unlike any other. A trial where science, motive, behavior, and memory would collide in front of a jury, each side fighting to define Stacy's final moments and the truth hidden inside them. Before we go any further, pause for a moment and imagine this case without that vial of blood. No preserved sample. No toxicology. No questions. No investigation. In thousands of sudden deaths across the country, no such sample exists. If Stacy had not been a registered organ donor, if that simple checkbox had never been selected, then the truth behind her final moments might have remained locked away forever. But the real question isn't why the blood was saved. It's why what was inside it didn't match anything her doctors expected. Suspense builds but no reveal yet. As the investigation quietly moved forward, the community began forming theories of its own. Some believed the case was being blown out of proportion. Others believed the story never added up from the beginning. Online discussions split into two distinct groups. One convinced that a tragedy had been misunderstood, and another convinced that something darker had been missed. Both sides were operating with limited information. Both felt certain they were right. And both would soon discover they had only seen the surface. In the aftermath, psychologists reviewing the case pointed to something rarely recognized in real time: the shift in a relationship that appears perfect on the outside. Experts note that emotional strain doesn't always appear as shouting or dramatic conflict. Sometimes it hides in quiet moments, a partner becoming withdrawn, a rise in tension without explanation, or a sense that someone is increasingly managing the household atmosphere. Those closest to Stacy didn't see a dramatic change, but they felt something shifting, something subtle, something silent. And when investigators began piecing together the small moments, they realized the timeline contained more questions than answers. And with the community divided, the evidence mounting, and the timeline bending under its own weight, a legal battle unlike anything this small North Carolina community had ever seen was about to begin. As the investigation concluded, the case shifted from medical mystery to legal scrutiny. Before a single day of trial could begin, lawyers from both sides worked to shape the battlefield. Defense attorneys filed motions, requests to suppress evidence, challenges to the admissibility of medical findings. Prosecutors responded methodically, preparing a carefully documented narrative, lining up the witnesses who would tell Stacy's story: her parents, medical specialists, investigators, and forensic experts. Every motion, every hearing, every procedural step was a test of patience, precision, and strategy. The courtroom was still empty, but the tension was palpable. The defense focused on the science. They questioned the reliability of testing on preserved samples. They highlighted the complexity of tetrahydrozoline detection in small vials stored for months. Chain of custody protocols were examined. Every step in handling the samples was scrutinized. Timing of symptoms, medical history, and normal life events were all reframed to suggest alternative explanations. The defense argued, could this have been a medical anomaly? Could there be another explanation for what was found? They asked questions. Questions intended to create doubt. Not accusations. Just meticulous examination of every fact. The prosecution's approach was deliberate and layered. They focused on pattern behavior, a timeline of financial activity, the toxicology findings, digital footprints that corroborated specific timelines, and alleged secondary incidents that, while unproven, required careful consideration. Each element was framed to show consistency, to connect small details into a broader picture, but without suggesting conclusions beyond the evidence. It was a strategy built on careful accumulation, designed to withstand rigorous cross-examination. For the jurors who would eventually sit in that courtroom, every detail mattered. Forensic reports, chemical analyses, and pattern behaviors had to be understood in the context of reasonable doubt. Charges carried weight, potential penalties that ranged widely depending on interpretation, and every witness, every expert, every document could shift perspective. It was a courtroom where scientific precision, human emotion, and legal strategy collided. And where one misstep, procedural, factual, or interpretive, could change the course of the case entirely. Even as both sides prepared, the trial remained elusive. The COVID-19 pandemic introduced delays no one could control. The complexity of evidence required additional expert reviews. Scheduling conflicts, procedural motions, and legal strategy extended timelines further. What could have been a straightforward trial became a meticulously orchestrated process, where patience was as important as preparation. Each delay, each motion, each expert opinion added layers, not only to the case itself, but to the anticipation building outside the courtroom. For the community, the family, and the investigators, the question lingered: when would the truth finally face the scrutiny of a jury? With every hearing, every document, every witness prepared, the case inched closer to its defining moment. And when the courtroom finally opened its doors, the collision of evidence, behavior, and emotion would be unlike anything seen before in this small town. Organ donation is a quiet, often unseen act of generosity. A choice made long before tragedy strikes, often with no expectation of recognition. Yet in Stacy's case, that simple, selfless decision became the unexpected key to understanding her final days. It raises a question few would have anticipated. Can a system designed to give life also shine a light on hidden truths? Forensic experts would later note, without preserved donor samples, the evidence that altered the course of this investigation may never have existed. In a way, life itself, through organ donation, became the mechanism of justice. Amid the legal proceedings and forensic scrutiny, two young girls lived in a world turned upside down. Stacy's daughters, now without their mother, became the silent witnesses to a family tragedy they would never fully understand. Authorities and family members worked carefully to protect them, their identities, their routines, their emotional well-being. Extended family and community networks stepped in. Church groups, neighbors, friends, all providing quiet support, meals, and guidance. Even as the adults argued over evidence, the girls navigated the normal challenges of childhood within a household forever changed. Stacy's death and the subsequent revelations sent ripples through her community. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones. Some expressed disbelief. Others quietly mourned the loss while wrestling with the new information. Church congregations discussed it cautiously, balancing grief, faith, and uncertainty. The public became divided. Some defended Joshua, convinced of innocence. Others worried that the patterns of behavior revealed a deeper reality. It was a community forced to confront the unimaginable, how tragedy could touch familiar streets and familiar faces, and how truth often arrives slowly in layers. Beyond the specifics of one family, Stacy's story raises universal questions. How well do we truly know those closest to us? How often do ordinary families carry extraordinary secrets behind closed doors? Trust within families is both fragile and essential. Hidden struggles may remain unseen until something extraordinary, like forensic science, brings them to light. The case also highlights the vital role of investigators, medical examiners, and forensic specialists. Their work relies not only on science but on patience, observation, and the willingness to ask questions that others may never consider. In the end, Stacy's story reminds us that even in the quietest homes, the smallest choices can have profound consequences, for life, for justice, and for the truth. Stacy's life, her choices, and her family's resilience continue to echo beyond the headlines. Her story is a reminder: the ordinary world holds extraordinary complexity, and the truth often emerges when patience, science, and compassion converge. As this story reaches its final chapters, one truth remains: the legal process is still unfolding. Joshua Hunsucker faces serious allegations. Charges are pending. No trial verdict has been delivered. And while the courtroom awaits its day, investigators continue to organize evidence, prepare witnesses, and refine timelines. Stacy's family, though still grieving, has remained resolute. They have expressed their desire for the truth to come to light, while protecting their grandchildren and honoring Stacy's memory. The outcome is not yet known, but the journey of discovery, the careful unraveling of the facts, has already changed lives forever. Stacy Hunsucker's story is more than a mystery. It is a reminder of the fragility of life, the weight of choices, and the profound ways in which ordinary acts can have extraordinary consequences. A single vial of blood, preserved for the purpose of generosity, became the key to unlocking questions that might otherwise have remained unanswered. Her life, her courage, and the instincts of those around her highlight the importance of listening, to loved ones, to intuition, and to the subtle signs that something is not right. And though her daughters continue to grow in a world forever changed, Stacy's story stands as a testament. Even in the quietest corners of our lives, truth can emerge, and the smallest actions can make the biggest difference. Stacy's story asks us to pause, to consider how closely we pay attention to those we love, and how even the smallest gestures of care can echo far beyond our own understanding. It is a story of loss, but also of vigilance, compassion, and the quiet power of truth. Thank you for spending this time honoring Stacy's story. Her life, her choices, and the lessons from this case deserve our attention, reflection, and care. What do you think about the evidence, the investigation, and the unanswered questions? Your voice matters. Sharing your thoughts helps spread awareness and ensures that stories like Stacy's are never forgotten. If you want more in-depth, respectful true crime documentaries like this, please like, subscribe, and share your reflections in the comments below. Every story we explore together brings us closer to understanding, compassion, and the importance of vigilance in our communities.